everybody. Welcome, and thank you for joining us. I'm sorry, I'm a little nervous. Bear with me, please. It's amazing I still get nervous doing these things. I'm Lori Podvesker. I am the Senior Manager of Policy here at INCLUDEnyc. We are an organization that works with families that have children with disabilities. Today's topic is supporting students and staff in student-led IEP meetings. This is one of a series of live stream presentations that air on the third Thursdays of each month at noon. We're going to keep today's conversation under 60 minutes. We will also use a chat box that you'll see in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. And we encourage everybody to ask questions during this hour. And we will do our best to get to them. But if we can't, we will follow up through email, giving answers. Also, we may not know the answers, and if that's the case, we will do our best in getting those answers as well. And we're really excited about this topic. This is something that has been around for a while, but the city is becoming more serious about implementing this in individual schools and on a system level. We are joined by the lovely Aaliyah Roth, who is our youth educator here. And Aaliyah is also a sibling of a young person with a disability, her brother Elliot. How old is Elliot?
Elliot's 22.
Elliot's 22. And Aaliyah is doing an amazing job working with young people, and so huge props. So glad you're here.
Thank you.
So Aaliyah, let's start off by you telling us a little bit about IEP meetings and why it's so important to have young people with disabilities who we're talking about at these meetings present.
Yeah, so I think for those of you who don't know, the IEP meeting is the annual or every 3-year triennial review of the Individualized education plan, which teachers and parents and supported staff members use to implement to support the student with disability. And I think a common trend is to leave the student out of their IEP meeting until they're 14 years old, which is legally when it's mandated that the young person be in their IEP meeting. But I think in today's conversation, we're really going to try and encourage parents and staff members to get students with disabilities into their IEP meetings as early as possible, because here, and any of you who have students or children who are going through transition, it is really important to know that once the student leaves high school, they will no longer have a teacher or staff member or parent at these meetings or at interviews or college interviews or meetings at the accessibility office to advocate for them. The only person that's going to be able to articulate their needs as per their IEP is the student themselves. So the sooner we get them into their IEP meetings and the more inclusive we are of them in their IEP meetings, the more comfortable they get with the language and the lingo, and the more likely they are to advocate for themselves beyond high school.
Yeah, so one of the goals we have for today is to talk about not only having young people present at their IEP meetings, but having them engaged and being part of the decision-making process. And before we go further, you made a really good point about how important it is for people, for students to know who they are and what they need, because when students are in the education system and have IEPs, they're entitled to services and supports through the federal special education law until they're 21 or they graduate. And some of the entitlements that go with that law are not the same once they age out.
Correct.
And so want to make it clear that through the IDA, the federal special education law, that other people can be at IEP meetings helping to advocate for students such as their parents, professionals, therapists, doctors, whomever, and that when they graduate or turn 21, that changes. And so it is utterly important that kids know who they are and what they need so they can do that. They can advocate for themselves when they go on to college, or they can disclose having a disability when they're employed in their accommodations, and that a different civil rights law kicks in, which is the American Disabilities Act, and that is about eligibility, not entitlement. And if you guys have questions or concerns about any of these topics and want to further explore them with one of us one-to-one outside of this conversation, we encourage you to reach out to us through our resource line. All the work that we do with families is free, and it's not a static thing, it's ongoing, so please use us anytime you want for as little or as much as needed. Okay, so in your opinion, self-advocacy is a huge undertone to this conversation. What are the benefits of kids being there, being engaged?
Yeah, I think it's really important to understand that eventually your student will be leaving high school. And even in middle school and high school, you want students to be their own advocate. So in the classroom, if they don't understand, they feel confident and comfortable raising their hand and asking for something to be read out loud, or asking for a calculator, or asking for the accommodations that they need. But ultimately, if this child or young person is not engaged in their IEP meeting, they may or may not know what they can ask for and how they should ask for it. And if that's lost on them in both school, middle school, high school, or transitioning out, self-advocacy won't be something that is ingrained in them, and furthermore, they won't know what language to use and how to ask. I can't stress enough, we're both former special education teachers, and I remember when I was teaching, I would see students, and you can visually see when they don't understand what's going on. You can look at a child and tell if they're disengaged in class.
Adults too, by the way.
Adults as well. And so, if you pop over to a student and say, what's going on? And they're like, I'm totally lost, I have no idea what's happening. And you're like, okay, so why don't you ask for support? And they're like, oh, I don't know, I don't know. And those are the kinds of things we want to avoid, both with academics, but as they transition out of high school, in career, if you're lost in a job situation, or you don't know how to enter an interview, and you don't know how to ask for help or the services and supports that you need, ultimately that situation might not work out, and that's what we're trying to avoid for our students and youth with disabilities.
Yeah, so we use the word transition a lot.
Yes.
Tell us your thoughts on that. Not how we use it, but what does that word mean in relation to what we're talking about? Yeah,
so the way at Include we talk about transition is we are looking at students with disabilities who are leaving the school system. So they're transitioning out of a system that really has been their whole life. Pre-K, K through 12, if not more, but ultimately at 21, whether they graduate or age out, they're leaving the school system in one way or another. And that is how we define transition here at Include. So if they're transitioning out of the school system, they're either entering college, career, an independent living center, or some type of supported service given by the government or some type of nonprofit support or agency. And that is how we define transition here. So if you're a young person leaving a system and entering another one, that's a transitional period.
Okay, that's helpful. So talking about the IEP process and what it looks like when kids are transition age 14 and up. Can you just spend a minute or two talking about how the content of the IEP relates to transition?
Yes.
Maybe give us some details.
Sure. So I think it's really important to note that the IEP is a very complicated document for both
Amen.
For both staff and service providers and parents and advocates alike. So digging into the IEP and the content of the IEP is a really, really complicated burden in itself. And breaking that down to students and young people who may not have been exposed to this document yet is also really overwhelming. So again, to reiterate Lori's point, if you want help with that, please reach out to us. But it is complicated. That being said, the content of the IEP is broken down in a way that really allows for support, not only with students engaging and having a commanding voice in their IEP, but with transition as well. So if you look at the physical IEP in itself, there are sections like student strengths, student interests, management needs in the classroom, which really is code for supports and services that students can ask for. And then there's an entire section about annual goals for students and transitional goals. And those are really sections that I would like to highlight as parts that you can pre-prepare your student for. That if you say, Lori, if you're in 7th grade, or let's talk, Jack is in 9th grade, and you say, Jack, well, what do you want to be when you leave high school? And he talks about that. That's a really wonderful way to not only encompass what his career goal is right now as a 9th grader, but also how that aligns to academic interests and strengths in the classroom.
So Lee, you bring up a good point. So, you know, and as a parent, you know, Leah brought up Jack's 14, having conversations with your children
Yes.
about who they are and what they need is not easy. And I'll speak from my own experience. And part of the reason that it's not easy is twofold. And one, it's really scary because you don't know what the future holds. And having a school to go to every day is comforting,
Yes.
as opposed to when he ages out, not having a dedicated place every day with a same community scares the crap out of me, excuse my French. So that part is scary. And then there's also the stigma part that is scary. And, you know, when kids are younger, we don't tell them certain things to protect them. And it's always a fine line as kids age, what to disclose and what not. And there's many parallels between that and when they get older and have a job, what to disclose. And so I think it's important for parents, for you folks to be nice to yourselves and, you know, understand that this is a process and there's no right or wrong way to do this. But one of the things that we don't think about enough is having conversations independent of IEP meetings. So, you know, as a parent, when I know my guy's IEP meeting is coming up, and I mostly do this because I work here, and I'm grateful for that, which is, you know, looking at what documents we have from teachers, progress reports, report cards, conversations with therapists, and thinking about what's working, what's not working, what lies ahead, and, you know, engaging Jack in those conversations prior to the meeting.
Yes.
So tell us, what does that look like? Because you're working directly in school with people.
Sure. So absolutely. I also think, I just want to bounce off what you said because I think that's really important. There is no right or wrong way to include your student in an IEP meeting. It doesn't have to be they don't attend at all or they attend for the whole thing, because IEP meetings can be very long. But if you just invite your young person or your child to the IEP meeting for 5 minutes at a time, 10 minutes at a time, so they start understanding that this is something that's going to happen every year over the course of their school years, eventually they'll be comfortable and prepared coming in and sitting in and listening and engaging. So to your point, be kind to yourselves and be patient with yourself and your student, because there is no right or wrong way and there is no extremity. But back to your question, so I am working with students, 9th through 12th graders in public schools in New York City, and we are working on this exact thing. We're working with students who have never seen their IEP before, who may not be aware that they even have a disability. They know that they receive services, because students are always aware when they're receiving something in the classroom, or not receiving something in the classroom. And they're really hard conversations, I have to say. You know, I'm going into schools and sitting with groups of 15 9th graders and saying, you know,
Oof.
Yeah, you guys all have IEPs, right? And they're like, oh yeah, that meeting we have once a year that's like a parent-teacher conference meeting. And I'm like, yeah, that. You know, that means that you guys all have some type of need, some type of learning or other disability in the classroom. And they're all kind of like, what? What are you talking about? And it can either be they can be very reactional, like upset or angry, or students are like, yeah, that totally makes sense once you actually explain to them what their classification is and what that looks like. It's actually really surprising to me how accepting students are of it when you don't stigmatize it and when you really explain. So you have a speech or language impairment. This means that you get X, Y, and Z because you struggle with X, Y, and Z. And students are like, oh yeah, that sounds right.
So being factual sometimes helps?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think being factional and rolling it out in a way that relates to the student, knowing what services they get in the classroom, like, you know that Miss Brown comes in and pulls you out once a week. Do you enjoy that? Yes, I love that service. You know that's because you get X, Y, and Z. They know what they're getting and they're aware of it. I think it is the daunting conversation of explaining why they're getting it and how it's supporting them, and that it is related to their disability. And that this document really is a tool for getting these services and maintaining them, and that it's important that the student come and say, you know, I want to keep getting pulled out for speech twice a week, and I want this service, because students know what they need or don't need in high school. It's just a matter of the language. to advocate appropriately.
And to throw us props again, I feel like this is an area that we are really helpful with parents, and we are more than happy to role play, more than happy to start those tough conversations, because I know as a parent it's not always what I say but how I say it, and it's hard not to project how my son may internalize his differences. I really don't know. I make assumptions which aren't always right.
Yeah.
And, we're really emotional when it's our own family. So I think, this is something that we are really good at doing. Another strategy that I've used is using visuals or talking about people they may know that have differences. I mean, listen, we all have differences, right? We use the term special needs. We all have special needs. We're all unique. But identifying like that is super important, and it helps with accepting. And, there's an adage out there, if a young person has ADHD, they will be an adult with an ADHD. It doesn't go away. You learn strategies and skills to compensate, and never too early to start that. Which brings us to, at what age should students start attending their IEP meetings, and what is that like in schools?
So I think that's a great question, and parents and young people ask us that a lot. I think it is most important to be aware of your young person or your child and what they need, and there is, again, no right or wrong answer to this. I would encourage you to get your child into their IEP meetings as early as possible, like first, second, or third grade. Whoa, I know, that seems like a lot, but that being said, back to our points earlier, it doesn't have to be for the whole time. It can be for 5 minutes at a time, 10 minutes at a time, and slowly you build up, but that really starts to break down the language barriers and the idea meeting barriers that, like, this isn't another parent-teacher conference where you're just talking about academic progress. You're really talking about the holistic vision of the child, how the child is doing in school, and for the kid to understand that at a young age, that you have a support group of people who are really there for you, and they want you to know what's going on and what you need and how they can get you to your next goal, I think is really, really important. And if you have an older student who's in middle school or high school, I would encourage you to get them into their meetings almost immediately, because they probably know what's going on more than you think they do.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And so I also think it helps desensitize people, and it becomes part of the norm. It's like if you have specialized transportation as a student your whole life, it's all you know, so you're going to ride the small yellow school bus. Yeah, that's true. So you mentioned earlier, me and you both have taught in our past, and like all of us, we know that every school is different, and cultures are different, and I think, there could be some resistance from school staff to bring in young people into their meetings because we don't have the experience to rely on, nor do we have the familiarity with being comfortable. And so, I think it's a struggle sometimes, and could be a struggle getting schools to be open-minded about this. So any tools or strategies on how we can change that?
Yeah, I think open communication with the school and the staff and the supported service people there is really key. I think one of the most important things is to let staff there know that one of your goals is for your child to ultimately be either leading or having a huge say in their IEP and what's going on. And that's an ultimate goal, not a goal right now, but an ultimate goal for your child. So disclosing that at the beginning of the year when you first meet the staff that your child will be engaging with the whole year, and saying, just so you know, at the IEP meeting, I do want to have my kid there for X, Y, and Z reasons, so that the staff don't feel like all of a sudden they have to pre-prepare all these extra materials for the kid, but that you disclose to them early that this is a goal of yours for your family and for your student, so that they're aware when the IEP meeting is coming up that that's something that they want. But I mean, we were talking about this earlier too. Even though 14 is the legal age for a child to have to be in their IEP meeting, you can include an IEP. You can include a child with at any age in their IEP meeting, no matter the age or state.
Yeah, and one of the things to be mindful of is going with your gut. So there are going to be topics and conversations that you don't feel comfortable with your child hearing.
Yes.
And that could happen at any age. I mean, I'm in my mid-40s. I know my mom still doesn't tell me stuff to protect me. But it's okay when you're at an IEP meeting with your child to ask for a break.
Yes.
That is okay. We as parents, have the right to ask for a break anytime about anything. And you could regroup. And so part of the planning process, if you're going with your partner, your husband, or a friend, is having a plan before the IEP meeting.
Yes. Just
so you can communicate.
Yes.
Oh, Olivia, I see a question.
Yes.
Olivia asked, my child is 15 and has never been to our IEP meeting. I know I'm late. Is there a best way to start? Good question.
Great question. So you're not late. We've been talking about there is no right or wrong time or process or age in which you really need to start this. But I would say step one is for you and your family and your child to have a conversation about this, regardless of when her IEP meeting is. But to sit down with your student and talk to her about these meetings and what they've been about and how the IEP has given her the services that I bet she's aware of in school. And start talking about how now that she's 15, in a couple years when she graduates high school, you're going to be creating a plan for her to transition out of high school, and you want her to be included in creating that plan, because the plan is ultimately about her. And that is the framework in which I would discuss this with a 15-year-old, is that you're now preparing to take your regents, and if college is a track you want to go down, prepare for college, and if career is a track you want to go down, prepare for that career. So frame it in a way that this is a document and these are meetings that she'll be going to every year that are really to help prepare her to leave high school and enter either career or college. And I find that's a really effective way with older students to incorporate them and get them invested in this meeting, because it's about them and their future.
Totally. So, I think it'd be helpful to spend a few minutes talking about working with teachers about this, because, we all know things could be better. And we also know that teachers have so much on their plates and so many demands when it comes to paperwork, implementation, teaching the class, preparing. What are some ideas on that and being helpful to teachers in a collaborative way, with a sense that we all have the same agenda, which is how can we best support my kid and your student? Yeah,
I think that's a great question. And it looks different at different ages, I think, depending on the child's need and how old they are. I tend to think with the middle school and high school mindset on that, because I was a middle school teacher and I'm now working with high school students. I think, back to our point earlier, that open dialogue at the beginning of the year, that this is a goal that you have for your child. I also think having a conversation with the service providers and teachers about how to speak to your child specifically when you give them accommodations and modifications.
Oh, so important.
So important, and I think that can be really impactful in either a positive or negative way with how a child receives the services that are mandated on their IEP. I remember once I was working with a student who loved being pulled out of class with me for sets, which is
What's sets?
Sets, which is historically was called resource room, but is now called sets. It's when a small group of students gets pulled out of a class for a smaller group instruction based on their individual academic need.
That's one of the few ways. That's
one of the few ways.
Right.
But that's what this was in this particular instance I'm referring to, is they were pulled out of a general education class to do small group instruction, and this student loved being pulled out, but she got really upset one day with the way in which I pulled her out, because she felt like it kind of isolated her from the rest of the group, which is definitely a reality for a lot of students.
Totally. I mean, we hear from parents that kids aren't getting counseling because they don't want to get pulled out because of the stigma. Yes.
And so I think that my mistake and the learning lesson for me is that I didn't have a conversation with this student about how I was going to be pulling her out, when I was going to be pulling her out. We could have come up with strategies that this was after lunch, she could just walk straight up to the room. There were so many things that could have gone differently that would have prevented her from feeling that stigma and isolation. And conversations like that are really important, knowing if your child feels a certain way about getting pulled out of class for their service, and trying to work with the staff and with the service providers to prevent that, so it's as positive of an experience as possible.
Totally, and this is so important because, as we all know, nothing is ever isolated
Yes.
or siloed, and that a lot of self-advocacy has to do with trusting ourselves as individuals, and a lot of that is based on successful relationships. And
Yes.
so coming up with mechanisms in the beginning of the year with communicating with therapists and teachers, from the parents' point of view is really helpful.
Yes.
And, figuring out what works and what doesn't work will directly lend itself to how comfortable a student will feel in their IEP meeting.
Absolutely.
And so, I'm thinking about scripts and examples.
Yes.
And, a basic question is, to a student, how do you think you're doing with this?
Yes.
What do you find that is working? Where
Yes.
your strong points are? Where
Yes.
do you think you can use more support? Where do you feel unclear?
Yes.
Or stuck?
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think essential conversations like, how do you feel like you're doing in math? Why do you think you're doing really well in math? And even answers like, because I really like math, tells a lot about the student and their personal strengths and where they're struggling. If they're not doing well in math, if they're doing really well in math, where are they not doing so well? And those are things that feed right into the IEP. There's an entire section that asks about their present levels of performance in their academic areas. And so for teachers and staff to have student voice saying, Lori doesn't think she's doing so well in English, she said that, is a beautiful, beautiful way to incorporate student voice in the IEP. So those types of questions for either an elementary school age student or a high school age student can be really impactful in having student voice in the IEP.
Yeah, it just occurred to me that, we should acknowledge that not every student is going to want to be at their IEP meeting.
Absolutely.
Or going to want to be engaged, or has the cognitive and or communication skill set.
Absolutely.
And the reason that I just thought of this is my son Jack is nonverbal for the most part. He's a terrific communicator and at times talks too much in his own way, but it's a different story. And I think about his last IEP meeting that he was at, and he didn't engage or say much, yet he was quiet and he was listening to every word we said and was looking at the speaker. And that in itself I found incredibly valuable. One, I never thought he could sit still that long.
Right.
Two, we were all doing the work that needed to be done together as a team, and he saw that we supported each other and that we aligned.
Yes.
And I think that message alone for him is huge because he knows that we all care about him. And if that is all he got out of that meeting, that's a great start.
Absolutely.
And so I want to acknowledge parents and professionals who work with kids with more involved needs, because they too can be part of this process.
Absolutely.
I think it's really important to be mindful of that.
Yes.
So, can you tell us about some success stories?
Yes.
Some positive outcomes.
Absolutely.
We're all about the small successes here.
So Lori brought up earlier, we're implementing a program in 10 public schools where the learning needs are vastly different in every school. We're in one District 75 school, we're in a school in Brooklyn, we're in a transfer school. We're in every type of school, which is really
inclusive.
wonderful. We're inclusive here. So last year we were in 6 schools, this year we're in 10, and all of the 6 schools that we were in last year have asked us to return. And we met with a school a few weeks ago. It was a transfer school, so this was a student who's 19 turning 20, and we were meeting with his special ed provider from last year, and she was talking about the program and why she wanted it back, and she said, Sean said that at the beginning of the year, he went up to all his teachers and said, just so you know, I have an IEP, and that means that I get extra time, breaks during class, and he just listed out all of the things that he's supposed to get in his classes. Because he knew, I know, it was so amazing. The teacher I just got chills talking about it, because he knew that, based on our conversation, not all teachers are going to have the opportunity to read an IEP before the beginning of the year, unfortunately. It's just not the case at every school, or for every teacher. And so he knew, based on our conversations last year and his IEP meeting conversation last year, that he had to take it upon himself to go to all his new teachers and say, just so you know, I have this is why, this is what I need, I'm really trying to graduate this year, here is how I can do it.
Amazing.
It was amazing, and I could tell dozens of stories like that based on this program, but I think the goal is ultimately that that's what your student does every year in small micro steps. So if your 5th grader goes in and says, just so you know, I need extra time on my tests, that is a victory. And then if your high schooler says, during a college interview or an accessibility meeting during college, that they received this in high school and this is what they need in college to be successful, that's a huge victory.
Totally. It reminds me of a saying that we use in the disability rights community, which is nothing about us without us.
Right.
And that is so important.
Yeah.
So what do these skills look like for kids who go on to work?
Yeah, absolutely. So we work with a ton of young people who either do graduate high school or they age out for whatever reason, and they either want to pursue their GED or task, or they want to work, which is great. So it looks like a lot of things. There are a ton of programs and services out there for young people who have the ultimate goal of working in employment, maybe college later, maybe not. But there are, just like you said, the ADA, there are accommodations and access points that they have that they may not know about if they aren't being included in their IEP meeting. So they're part of their transition goal section of the IEP also proposes solutions that parents, families, staff members help support the young person with. So, for example, we were working with a student who was going to graduate last spring, and her ultimate goal was to become a child care provider. She wanted to work at a daycare. She did not want to go to college. She wanted to get her certification and then start working at a daycare facility. So on her transition goal, one goal was to pass the last remaining regions that she had. Another goal was to sign up with Access VR, which is a vocational training program in New York City. And then another goal was related to that as well, which is over the summer work at a camp so that she starts gaining experience with children. And because she was there, she knew exactly what those transition goals were, and she held her teachers and her parents accountable for getting all that paperwork in. She would call me and be like, my mom was supposed to send you this document, and I know she didn't, so can you call her and make sure that she gets it in? And I mean, that, again, I think the undertone, like nothing about us without us, is really the essence of this. If they can be there and they can speak up for themselves and in whatever way, shape, or form, and they know what they should be getting and why and what they want, that's really the end goal.
Yeah, totally. So one of the let me start over. So for everybody who is joining us today, again, thank you. And before I forget, we're going to be following up with email with some tools. And so I don't want to forget. Can you just take a minute showing us some of the tools we have?
Yeah, so as Lori said, we'll be following up with email.
And also, sorry to cut you off,
yes.
We'll also have them on our website, so share the love with people, and let them know that they'll be there.
Please do. So the first page in this document is called Tips for Encouraging Student Participation in IEP Meetings, and it really just summarizes everything that we've talked about here. Speak openly, explain to your student what services they should be getting and why, etc. And it just kind of walks you through a couple of tips. This would also be a really nice tool to bring to your school to show them what you're rooting this in. I think that it's a really nice encompassing document of what we talked about here. Very simple. The next document is a little bit heavier, but I think a really, really great tool for students who who are ready to dive into their IEP and really understand what the physical document looks like. So this is from Hudson Valley Special Education Parent Center, and it's a student-friendly IEP tool where it breaks down what the physical IEP looks like, and everything is blank. So if you wanted to, and you feel like your student would be open to it, they can look at this and start filling out sections of the IEP, either verbally or non-verbally or in written form, however they would be comfortable and what's accessible to them. And then you can bring this to the IEP meeting and say, look, Lori filled this out. She said she's doing really well in this class, not so well in this class. Her ultimate goals are, and so on and so forth.
This is an amazing tool that we're really grateful for the Westchester Special Ed Parent Center sharing this with us, because
it's amazing.
Yeah, it's a traditional New York State IEP, but it also has questions that prompt students to think about the IEP in student-friendly terms and to get their input, and it's concrete. So it's not abstract, and really encourage everyone to take a look at it and share with anyone and everyone. It's pretty amazing.
And I think it goes back to what you were saying earlier, that you were thinking of some questions that would really probe students to engage in their IEP meeting, even if they weren't so comfortable or were a little overwhelmed or didn't really understand what was happening. The questions: what is your best subject? What are you good at? What do you enjoy doing outside of school? Students and a lot of parents and staff don't realize that those are things that should go in the IEP. They're really, really vital to both academic and career and college success, having those things about the student in the IEP, and I don't think anyone can answer them better than the student themselves. So I think this is a really, really powerful tool for both parents and staff to use with their students or children, and to help prompt participation in the IEP meeting through a document that looks exactly like what you'll be seeing at the IEP meeting.
Yeah, one of the beauties about this document is that, and don't tell anybody that I'm saying this, is that the questions that are student-centered are universal. So it doesn't just apply to students with IEPs, it's for kids in gen ed, even for adults. They're very simple questions that I'm sure all of us ask ourselves all the time. What are you interested in? What works? What doesn't work? I think we just put up the link to the document. Thank you, friends. And wondering if anybody else has any questions that they want to throw out. Let's just take a minute to scan. Okay, I'm not seeing much. Oh. Olivia's writing now, or was. Can you read an example of the language they use? Yeah, great. So,
so one of my favorite sections is measurable post-secondary goals.
Exciting stuff.
Exciting stuff.
Aaliyah, freeze.
Yes.
Can you say that in a parent-friendly way?
Yes. Measurable post-secondary goals are your goals for your student once they leave high school.
And so when we say measurable, what does that look like?
That looks like things that you can take tangible and actionable steps towards. So measurable post-secondary goal would not look like Lori wants to be a doctor. Not what we want to see on the IEP. What we do want to see is Lori will intern at a medical facility over the summer of 2017 to align with her career interests.
Great example.
Thank you.
Great example.
That is a tangible, physical step that the staff at the school and parents and students can take towards Lori's ultimate career goal. Her ultimate career goal should be in here, but a measurable post-secondary goal needs to be something that you can actually take a physical step towards. So in parent-friendly terms, this says measurable post-secondary goal. The question and language that they use on here is, what are your goals for life after high school? What type of job do you want to do? Do you need to develop goals to be able to live on your own someday? What are the physical goals that you can do every day to start working towards your ultimate career objective?
Right, it could be independently traveling, it could be interning, it could be
learning how to cook,
it could be exploring 10 websites and organizations online and figuring out what you like, what you don't like. Sometimes we forget the power of deduction, meaning that it's just as helpful to figure out what a student doesn't want as it is finding out what they want. It's a way to narrow it down and align their interests. I think, there's a lot of pressure, and as we know, if someone was to ask us at that age, we may not have an answer, and that's okay too. But to start moving in that direction. And it's not easy. It's hard to tease those things out, and as a parent, again, be kind to yourself, because none of this goes the way we plan at any time.
I also think to that point, exposure from the child's perspective is really important as well. A child may have seen a movie where the doctor was the best character, but they don't really know what it looks like and feels like to be a doctor. So exposing them to these things can also be a transitional goal, is visit a hospital, visit this, and I think that would be really beneficial to the student and go towards the power of deduction of, oh, I've been in the hospital, I realize I can't be around needles, not for me anymore. And steps like that, exposure is really, really important, because students and young adults will have a feeling about it instinctually.
Yeah, so I see a question from Angela, but before I get to it, which we will, you know what, let's just get to it. So Angela, I lost my train of thought, don't know the truth.
Angela says, do we have permission to share the student-led IEP packet electronically with our SEPTAs?
SEPTAs. So we don't have SEPTAs here in New York City. It's my understanding that SEPTAs are Special Ed Parent Teacher Associations. And the answer is yes. Absolutely. Please do that. Spread the love. Spread the love.
Any of the tools that are in this packet, you're more than welcome to share with your child, your student, your staff, whomever. They're really here for you to use as a tool at your disposal.
Yeah, so I remembered what I wanted to say, which was...
No problem.
Which is that sometimes, at these meetings, it can be very intimidating.
Yes.
And what are some strategies that we can use to help prepare kids and parents to be less intimidated at the meetings?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, because I think both about my brother's IEP meetings, which I was a part of at a very young age. We will get to your question. And my students' IEP meetings, and I remember pulling my students in, and they were terrified. A student walks into an IEP meeting, and around them is their service providers, their teachers, the school psychologist, sometimes a dean, their parents are there. I mean, ultimately, they're probably going to think they're in trouble initially.
That's right.
So I think first and foremost, back to your point from the beginning, pre-conversations, preparation conversations, the night before, the week before, however your child processes that is really important. So what I would encourage my parents to do, I would always call a couple days or a day before the IEP meeting was scheduled and say, reminder, this is when the IEP meeting is. I would encourage you to have a conversation with your child because they're going to be there as well. I would also pull the student and say, hey, Lori, reminder, you're going to be pulled during your lunch period for your IEP meeting. This is who's going to be there. So that they don't kind of walk in and feel really, really intimidated. I think on the parent end, you brought this up earlier, bringing a friend, bringing an ally, bringing a partner or a spouse, really, really valuable so you're not going alone. I think calling us before your IEP meeting is also really, really helpful so that you know what questions you can ask and what types of conversations you can expect. I really think with IEP meetings, preparation is the key, and if you go in with a set of goals and questions that you really want to propose to your staff and service providers for your child, that really will lead to the least amount of intimidation and anxiety.
Yeah, thanks. That's really helpful. One of the things I've noticed working directly with parents is that 95% of the time, parents are spot on and they're doing everything right in every way, yet it can be isolating and lonely because I think, again, this is universal, no matter who your kid is. You never know if you're doing the right thing because we seek this validation. And one of the things, again, that I think we're really good at is listening. And that, thank you, I see you guys answering questions, is that, talking to people who understand is really valuable.
Yes.
And that could be us. It could also be, as a parent, if you know other parents with kids who are doing the things that you want to do, such as including your kid in IEP meetings, having conversations about their differences,
Yeah.
to talk with them, and also, you know, to seek out other kids who are doing well with being different. And when I say doing well, that they're okay with it. And, you know, sometimes, I struggle as a parent when my kid asks me why he doesn't go to the same school as the kids in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
You know, by focusing on him and not focusing on other kids,
Yeah.
which is, you know what, buddy? Where you go to school is the best place for you right here and right now. I don't know what that will look like.
Yeah.
And, you know, validating his feelings because they're real.
Yeah.
And, you know, describing things in a way that, you know, let him know it's okay, and that having disabilities is a part of him, just like having blonde hair is, and that it doesn't define him.
Yeah.
I think it's really helpful to be mindful of that and remind
Yes.
kids of that. So thank you, Angela and Ada. I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name, for answering those questions. We're almost out of time, and so I want to ask for your last thoughts before we wrap up.
Yeah, I think what you just said made me think of Elliot, my brother, and I remember I introduced him to a friend of mine a couple years ago when he was 19 or 20, and I remember my friend asked if it was okay to ask him what his disabilities were, and I was like, of course, go ahead, and I didn't know if he'd know the answer or not, even though he's been in his IEP meetings since middle school. And she asked, and he was like, well, I have anxiety, I have ADHD, I have an intellectual disability, and he just went down the list of classifications. And I was like, Elliot, that's amazing. Where did you get all that language? And he's like, you and Mom and Dad have been talking about that to me for the past, I don't even know how many years. And it wasn't even like a singular conversation with him. It was just, over time, he had been included. We never talked about him without him there. It's exposure, and he was so unashamed about it too. He listed these things like, it was like, Elliot, what do you look like? I have blonde hair and glasses. He just...
Way to go, man.
It was really amazing, because I think that's really the power of exposure and just open dialogue with whoever you are here listening about. He had been in his IEP meeting since middle school, and I think over time he just picked up the language that we were using, and by listening the way Jack was, he knew we were talking about him, and so over time he was able to do that, and now he's in, you know, a program where he has to be able to speak about his disabilities in order to be successful, and he can do it, and we're not sitting here worrying that he won't be able to articulate that, because we know he's been prepared and he's been included his whole life.
That's right. It's the power of inclusion.
Yep.
So I want to thank everybody for joining us. Aaliyah, you had mentioned before we went live, we have an upcoming...
Yes, we sure
our next
do.
Include NYC Live stream.
Yes, it's December 15th at noon. And that will be with Jean and a couple of New York City Department of Education specialists from ASD, the ASD Nest and Horizon program, about kindergarten for children with autism spectrum disorder, which will be amazing.
Yeah. Great. Thank you. Whoop. Oh, yes.
Yay!
Yeah. Thank you, everybody,
Thank you
for
so
joining
much.
us, and look forward to hearing from you soon.